Welcome back to another episode of Practice Underwater. This is your host, Dr. Matt Garino. I am Sans George today, but he will be with us on the outro, so don't worry. He's coming up. We have a really cool interview today. It is actually a specialist who bought a GP office. We're extremely biased here to GPs here at J Praxis, so this is cool for us. Whole different perspective. Someone's doing something really unique in the profession, and someone who is a middle-aged dentist who went through a whole hell of a lot of schooling and found a love of business in the middle of his career and turned that into a successful practice ownership. So I think it's a really cool, interesting story for you guys to hear. So without further ado, here's our guest for today. Welcome back to the Practice Underwater podcast. This is your host, Matt Garino. Got a really special interview for you guys today, a little bit different than the norm of what we have on Share Praxis, where we're very general practitioner specific. Today, we have a specialist who bought a GP office and is doing some pretty amazing things. Without further ado, welcome to the podcast.
Hello, everybody.
Awesome. Well, we sent out a Facebook invite to anyone who wanted to come on the podcast. You responded. What did you see in it for you coming on today?
Well, the podcasts have been instrumental in my life, so I felt really that I should really give back by sharing my story. I very accidentally got into podcast world last April, just by total coincidence, and that really changed my life for the better. I went episode after episode backwards and to the beginning, and I was somebody who knew nothing about the business of dentistry or anything. All I knew was just the actual clinical dentistry, so that I just felt to give back.
That's awesome, and it's really cool because the audience can't see you, but you're a middle-aged guy. I would say you've been in dentist for a little while, and you kind of have learned all this clinical skills you can, but then you still were able to learn the business side even into your career. And talk about a little about that kind of shift for you.
Sure. So I don't mind. I'm 40 years old. I I bought my practice. This is my first practice that I bought at the end of towards the end of last year, last quarter of last year. Um, the reason I waited this long was I went through several different residencies and fellowship, and which I'm sure we'll get to at some point. But or do you want me to talk about this now? My
Go for it.
Okay. So, the usual, the college, then went through dental school. Then, towards the end of dental school, I wasn't sure what I wanted to do. I was thinking about perio at some point, but I did a clerkship. I liked it, but I wasn't 100% sure yet. So, I thought I better do a GPR. I did a GPR, and throughout the GPR year, I got exposed to surgery and implants and fell in love with it. But um, it was towards the end, and I basically went back to my advisor at the dental school. I said, I just realized that I'm getting interested in perio, and she basically told me that this was, I think it was either January or February of you know, uh, towards the second half of the GPR. And she said, you're too late. The acceptance is gone. But why don't you go back and call every program and see if they have any cancellations? You may get lucky. And this is exactly what I did. It was a Friday when I talked to her. On Monday, I called, I think 32 or at the time or 40 programs. And a couple said that they had immediate cancellations. One was in the East Coast, one was on the West Coast, and I flew to both, and I ended up going to work, taking the one on the East Coast. And
Wow.
so by pure luck, so 6 months later, I moved, started the Perio Fellowship, Perio residency, and throughout that, it was a very heavily clinical program. I got exposed tremendously to it throughout that. Also had a master's, and then at the end of the program, I realized that perio has become even with interactions that I had with the general dentists, I that were undergrads and going through, the way it worked for us was that we had to get referrals from the pre-doc clinics, and I realized how isolated I would be as a periodontist only. I thought to myself that I can't imagine myself just doing one thing and not be able to contribute in other modalities. I also didn't want my faith to be dependent on others. I wanted to be in control of my own life as far as uh, having referrals. So I decided to continue to Periopros, which is a fellowship. I considered seriously to do full pros, but as you know, the tuition of going through dental school, GPR, perio, it was already, I was, towards upwards of 300 to almost 400,000 in debt. And at that point, going through pros would have been another two to 300, and I wasn't going to go down that road. But the fellowship program, it was a 2-year fellowship program that I joined, and you would get paid for it. So at least I wasn't in paying wasn't much, but at least it was better than zero. I mean, paying tuition. So
So why the thought to do the perio pros after the after the perio residency?
because I wanted to, when I was in Perio, I ended up doing a lot of all on four style. This is back in mid 2000s. Late 2000s, 2008, 2009, somewhere in there. And I got to do a lot of, back in the day, we used to place 6 to 8 implants in an arch. And then we would have a temporary, basically made out of the wax up, and we would put holes in it and would try to reline it. And it was a tedious, this is before all on four era. Um, so doing those, and I had a faculty mentor that was doing a lot of those, and I felt like, oh my goodness, I have so much more control over the case. So I just wanted to be able to carry the case from A to Z, and I felt that the patient is going to get served better. So the question is, why did I continue and not use my general dentistry skills? I don't know how it was for you, Matt, but when I was in dental school, I was just focused on trying to, get the requirements done, and I didn't feel very comfortable with the crown and bridge at the time. So this gave me the ability to refresh my skills and interact with the prosthetic residents. Became really good friends. Used their pros lab for a lot of lab work, and basically learned a lot. The program, the way it was designed, was that periodontists would learn pros and the prosthodontists would learn perio. So we would pair up and we would teach each other, um, you know, our specialty skills. Um,
Yeah, I really like what you said. It's like it's the best for the patient, for the person who's going to be restoring, to the one doing the implants, to the one doing the sedation. Like you're seeing it from start to finish, and at the end of the day, that's the best setup for the person who's getting the treatment done.
Correct. And I'll go a step further. This is, I know this is going to be very controversial, but I think that periodontics, of course, this has parts of the country are, every part is different. But in my opinion, in the majority of the country, in our lifetime as a dentist, periodontics is going to go towards a very isolated and basically a dead specialty. There will still be a need for periodontists, but as a old-fashioned perio where you sit and people refer you, it's not going to happen. I think that if you ask me if I go back to dental school, would I do all these residency? It took me basically 6 years of specialty. Total is 4 years of dental school, a year of GPL, 2 years of perio, 2 years of periopros, 6 years plus 4, 10 years of dentistry. And was it worth, or could I have just done general dentistry and go take CEs? And I'm not sure if I would go down that road again, just because I see a lot of you guys coming out very capable, um, and very good hands, and you could still learn very all these skills without investing your time and your tuition. Uh,
Yeah, I think it's a good point. Like the traditional route of learning these skills, even in the 10, 15 years since you were learning them, has completely changed. I mean, from
100%.
technology making implants easier to, CE courses just exploding and providing immense value and live patient experience that, you don't need to go that traditional route that you went. Not that there's anything wrong with how you did it, but it's like there's so many more options I feel available now.
Absolutely. And back in the day, maybe I was traditional and old school, but I don't know, or at least I wasn't aware of, I didn't think of it this way. I thought that if I go and learn a CE, I wouldn't learn it to the level that I would learn it as a residency. Maybe so, maybe not. But at the end of the day, I'm not so sure to the patient it would matter as long as the case is done the right way and it's aesthetic and you treat them right and you get help if you get stuck. I think that's all matters.
Absolutely. So now you're finishing this perioprost. You're out in the world. You're finally working after all these years of school and in residencies and GPRs and all that. Um, get us to how you decided to buy a GP office.
Great. So from the time, which was early 2011, where basically it was 2011 when I finished my periopros, until end of 2018, what happened? Why did I associate all that time without going for my practice? And the reason was, at least in my case, I got married to someone to my wife that was going through medical school at the time. And then she decided that she wanted to be a GI specialist. So, and their programs, the way it ranks is it's a match system where you match the programs and they rank you. And she ranked in a different state. So, even though when I came out of Peripros, I joined a fully blown, basically full blown prosthodontic office, and I was doing really, really well for somebody who just came out of the first time I'm in private practice. I was making very good money and fees for service excellent on the path to partnership or ownership. But they say you plan and God laughs. And at the time, I had the choice of either keeping the practice or go with my wife. I really seriously thought about traveling weekends back and forth, but it was not for us. So basically, I went, and at the time, I was teaching at at the fellowship that I came out of. So I went back and I told one of my fellows that, listen, I'm gonna give you the best job, but you should, you have to rent my house until I get back for 3 years. And he was like, sure, deal. So took the practice, and eventually, actually, he ended up buying the practice, which was based on my advice, and he did very well. So we took off and went, and then after her fellowship, her residency, she wanted to do a transplant fellowship. Then we had to go to another town, place, and then finally after that, we came back to where we started. And
You guys are the
so,
most highly trained couple there is. Highly specialized.
so we came back and finally bought a house beginning of 2018, and October 1st, I was a practice owner. So,
Awesome. That's great.
sometimes, you know, uh, you just have to go adjust with life.
That's awesome. It's such a cool story that you're able to put your relationship above, your career ambitions at that time, and that's
Yeah, I
that's tough to do.
I didn't have a choice. It was either a divorce or a career. It was as simple as that because it wasn't going to happen for 3 years flying back and forth. I'm sure others can do it, but it wasn't for me.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. Well, so then you're back where you want to be. You're finally in a stable place. Your wife's not moving around different
Yes,
fellowships and all that. So
yes. And
what was it about this office that attracted you to it?
exactly right. Good question. So remember April Of 4 months after buying the house and settling down, finally I get involved with the podcast. I'm listening to it like religiously, as if, and also I'm associating other practices and driving hour and a half a day at least. So this was a perfect time for me to really understand how to value a practice and what to do. So I came across this practice. I was actually an associate in, just doing implants for the guy. He was a general dentist, has been there 25 years, and he had a heart attack. Not a heart attack, he had a quadruple bypass surgery. And in the process of during the surgery, he was a left-handed, and his plexus got injured, and his hand went numb. And he did a lot of therapy and came back somewhat, but at the end of it, he had a lot of pain. He had a lot of health issues, other health issues, and he was just done. He was about 63 years old. He could have done it more if he wanted to, but he just was ready to go. And what had happened, without me knowing, he had tried to sell it for the past year and a half or two. And three people came in, looked at the practice, and they walked away because the practice was in a free fall downhill. It was a negative cash flow. In fact, by the time we closed in 2018, the first 8 months of 2018, he had lost $10,000 a month. He had to put $10,000 in to keep the lights on and keep the staff. But basically, he came to me and said, "Listen, I think this practice would be best for you. You know these patients, you've done work on them, but this practice has potential. I can't do this." And he was also into sleep apnea. He just wanted to. He was done with the business of dentistry. He was done with dentistry. He wanted to do some sleep apnea, and that's it. So I basically I called George.
That's what you do with big decisions. That's what I do.
I called George, and George, with his ultimate wisdom, he told me the philosophy we go with is cash flow. You want to get something as big as you possibly. This is what we teach. This is what we believe in. Uh, I don't know if this is a good idea. And basically told me, don't do
Mm-hmm.
it.
He doesn't mince words.
Yes, he's what I love about George is he's extremely knowledgeable, but he's very direct, and he will tell you, like it or not, you will know. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
so I sat down and really thought it out, and I said, I know these players at the practice, that they were young, they were ambitious, and I really felt that the practice is mismanaged. It's in an area that there's a lot of the average income household is about $146,000. So there's a lot of money in that area. And I also did the research, and with the dental graphics, and I found out that there is no periodontist in that area. So I had a talk with the hygienist and the rest of the staff, and they said to me that they really think that if I were to take over, they would really do their best to help me out, and and so I started negotiating with a guy, and the price that we and then I'll tell you the price is a different story, but the practice was doing. Do you want me to tell you what the practice was doing and how much he wanted for?
Yeah, because I want to hear what the old practice was doing, and then now what you're doing
Yes,
now.
the practice was doing 550,000, I think, per year.
And that's the losing 10,000 a month level,
Correct.
right?
It was at some point $1 million, 1.2, and it was going downhill fast. And he had offers of the people on the table for one guy, at least the last guy offered him 325 for and again it was a negative cash flow. So um, he came to me and said, "Listen, he said I told the guy I want 375 or something like that, and the guy walked away, and I should have just taken 325. But listen, if you offer me 325, I'll take it." So I looked at it. I was like, okay, I guess if the guy offered 325, he did his research, right? So he had an accountant, and the crazy person that I was at the time, I said, okay, 325, let me go to the bank. I
Yeah,
ran
you're
to the
just like,
bank.
that sounds right.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I ran it with a CPA that he was like, yeah, I guess so. We could do this. Anyhow, I ran to the bank, and the bank came back and said, absolutely not. This is not worth 325. And if the bank tells you that, you're like, oh. So at that point, got really, I was like, oh, what was I about to get myself to? So I hired this really good CPA that I can tell you his name, but everybody knows him on Dental Town. He is very, very well known across the country, very capable. So I hired him. He went through it and he said, absolutely not. I agree, blah, blah, blah. This is worth 225. So I said, he said between 200 and 250. So I went back to the seller. I said, this is, the bank says they can't do it. And he said, oh, the hell with that. My agent says you should go to this bank. So go to this bank and call their agent and all that stuff. I was like, okay. I went to the bank that he said, same thing. The second bank came back and said, not worth 325. So I said, okay, here's the deal. If you want me to buy this practice, I was told that it's between 200 and 220, 200 and 250. I'm going to take the middle, 225, take it or leave it. And that's it. So, so he, lots of up and down, lots of up and down. It took 6 months, and finally he said, okay, fine. I mean, he literally didn't have a choice, but he really thought that it was worth a lot more than it is.
Because at one point it was worth a lot
it
more,
was worth,
and it's tough to let that go.
Exactly.
As a
And
seller.
I feel like it's like their baby, the sellers are very emotionally attached to it. So he took 225 and we transitioned, and he stayed for 6 months, and he retired after that. So
and now you've taken that 550 and you brought it to what level now?
so we are for sure on track to do over million of collections. So
That's awesome.
I honestly still don't know when they say the practice is doing 550 or whatever a million. Is it adjusted production or collection? I only go by collection because I feel like that's what it is.
That's usually like George says, the cash flow, money coming in is the number you kind of go by, but production is also something that you track.
Before we get back to the episode, I wanted to take a minute and thank Practice by Numbers. Without their help and allowing us to set up the shared practices dashboard, a lot of what we do on Practice Underwater wouldn't be possible. I want to take a minute and highlight a clip from the episode that we did with Rohit, where we highlighted some of the metrics that really matter most. I personally really like the dollars scheduled metric, because I always like to see, am I growing? Am I kind of, in which direction are we going? We should be at least scheduling more than we're producing, because usually some patients drop off. So I think that's kind of a good place to be. And so when I have a client and they just had a bad month and they're feeling down on themselves, I can always look at their dollar schedule to see which way are they trending. Are they going to have a big month next month? Like, can they cheer themselves up knowing that they're scheduled in a growth trajectory? Or are they ultimately, I need to say, hey man, you got an issue. I know you just had a good month, but you're setting up yourselves up for a couple bad months. And, then they can turn it around. But I think having that heads up holds you accountable as a business owner, where you're not relying on how much money did I make this month. And that's how I know, how things are going. I think you have the heads up one way or the other. I hope you guys enjoyed that clip. If you guys are interested in trying out Practice by Numbers and looking at your practice through the Shared Practices dashboard, and there are many other dashboards, you can go to practicebynumbers.com and set up a free trial.
Well, kudos to you for even having like the open-mindedness to buy a GP office.
Yes.
I feel like a lot of specialists would not be able to do that.
Exactly. Now, what's the problem with the GP office for somebody like me? The problem is that nobody will refer to you, right?
Of course.
Because there's restore. So what kind of a periodont, if I send you an implant to place, how could I guarantee that the patient is going to come back to me? So my philosophy from the get-go was, I have my own patients. I direct to public marketing. If I get referrals, it's bonus. I don't count on it. I don't lose sleep if somebody stops referring to me for whatever reason, or likes me or doesn't like me, or however. So I do actually I get referrals from orthodontists. I For PAOO, I don't know if you know PAOO, but it's called periodontally accelerated osteogenic orthodontics. It's when we flap the patient and basically put holes in the on the cortex, and then we graft, we draw the patient's
Wow.
blood, do platelet-rich fibrin, or and cause it. And the ortho, this is for adult ortho, and instead of taking 3 years to do traditional adult ortho, it will take a third of the time.
That's
So
awesome.
crazy cases. So orthodontists send me cases. I have one of the offices that I worked in last year was a corporate office. So the general dentist in that office really like to work with me. So they send me cases, and I make sure all those patients return to them.
So for all intents and purposes, the bulk of your patients are marketing you're doing, people you're finding, with a small percentage
Exactly
of
right.
it being referrals. So
Exactly. Majority.
kind of as a test case, you're a GP office with just incredible clinical skills
Yes.
compared to a normal GP.
Yes. Although I don't do root canals, something I'm intending to take. Root canals I refer out, and crazy ortho I refer out. Otherwise, I do Invisalign. I have recently hired a board-certified prosthodontist as well. So we can basically, because doing all on fours, if you're doing upper and lower, and then doing the temps and all that stuff, you can bring a lab tech, but I am a little crazy. I'd rather have a prosthodontist. So I needed help with those. It was very tiring, too long. And so I hired, and also I'd rather, I wanted I needed help. So one philosophy is to bring a super GP in, because you could, the salary is less, but I found a very good prosthodontist that I felt comfortable with, so I went with that.
Nice. Well, awesome. Where would you say, we'll get into your dashboard and your metrics in here in a little bit, but you came to us. What do you feel like you're still struggling with? Like where are you trying to take your practice to? You're say in a year, 5 years. Where's your practice wanting to go in your ideal world?
So where do I want it to go? I have a dream of having 10 to 12 chairs, which my lease is up in 3 years. So that's hopefully by then I can grow enough so that I can buy a building. My dream is to own my own real estate. 10 to 12, maybe more chairs, depending on how many, 4,000 square foot or more. Huge, and then have a multi-specialties, but specialists in it, one-stop shop, state of the art. But I also want to bring a dental anesthesiologist in, so we can put patients down, and basically perio, pros, ortho, and pedo if it's possible, and fit in well, and endodontist. Basically, create a specialty level, and have that and have it. But the only question in my mind, which I haven't settled, is how to keep everybody in so that there is minimal turnover. And I might have to come up with some sort of a partnership of some sort, because I hate turnover and I feel that the patients don't get served. So there has to be something for everybody.
That's really cool.
That part of it I haven't figured out.
What's all in that for you? Like, why is that vision important to you?
Because I truly believe that patients get served when providers are under one roof. I truly, to my core, do not believe in I feel that patients get served better than just the communication is better. So I can tell you, me and the prosthodontist that works for me right now, we go look at the patient together. The patients love it. They love when two people stand in front of them and talk. They talk dentistry. Could you open? Could you close? What do you think of this? What do you think of that? We analyze. Um, I can tell you how many patients, when I tell them, I can't do endo. I'm not doing endo. I haven't done endo for a while. I'm going to refer it up. Why can't you just do it, man? What do you? But I just that's my philosophy. I
But
think
for
one
you
stop
though,
shop.
like for you, what is it going to create for in your life, in just for you specifically?
Uh, a lot of satisfaction. I feel that I created something that um, it runs on its own. Obviously, hopefully, financially very rewarding, and hopefully, I'll get to a point that I don't have to be there every day to manage it, and the system will run on its own. So for me, these are. I hope I answered your question.
Yeah, you did. How many days do you want to be there?
I think 3 days would be good. Um, but I love dentistry. That's the thing. I love dentistry, but uh, so. But I have started to. Uh, I have started to love the management side too, since I've been under the influence of George and Richard.
They can turn anyone, even the most clinical trained specialists there are. They can turn anyone.
Yeah, I mean, I truly think that they touched my life. I haven't even met them. I knew zero. I mean zero about anything, anything, practice management or anything. And I am still, I feel like I have a lot to improve. But without them, I feel that when I talk to my friends, I feel so much ahead of them. Even though some of them started way before me, but I feel like, and my team feel it.
Yeah, it's interesting. They always say it's like the 5 people you surround yourself with, but I always like included in there the podcast that I listen to or like the people I surrounded myself with, because I, like you, I didn't know George or Richard or some of these other podcast hosts for a while, but I felt like they were in my circle and on my team. So in that way, I can kind of trick myself.
And I feel better about myself because I used to only listen to Sirius XM, to the news, to this, that, all BS. But now I feel like if I don't listen to podcasts or something the industry in the morning and afternoon, I feel like I'm wasting my life.
That's so cool. Well, I want to pivot a little bit. So you have used a dental coach for the last year.
Yes.
I think it could be useful for our listeners just to hear a little about it. We won't go into specifics of who your coach was, but why did you reach out to a coach? Sure. What kind of results did you get? How do you feel looking back on it, and are you going to continue with one?
That was also through podcasts. You see, I believe that I know my weaknesses, and I've known that I knew that I know nothing about the business side, even though the podcasts were helping. And not only the shared practices podcasts, other podcasts too. That wasn't the only one I was listening to, although that was the one that made the most effect on me.
No free ads here.
Yes. I'm not going to tell you what else I was listening. But the reality is, I knew that I still don't know much. But the problem was it was very expensive to get a coach. But what made sense to me was that even the best athletes have a coach. I thought that even having the coach, even though it was extremely expensive, made the difference for the better. If I go back, I'll do it again. And I think that I'm going to have a coach as for a while, for many, many years to come, because sometimes it gets very lonely, and you need to talk to somebody. And you need somebody to kick you in the butt and say, you need to do this, or keeps you accountable. Especially at the beginning, I feel like I'm building a house, and if I put the bricks the wrong way, it's going to just become the Pisa Tower. No offense to the Italian friends.
No, it's like, it's almost like those are your formative years as a dental owner. And, to just do that on your own could lead to a shaky foundation.
Why reinvent the wheel? Why?
Exactly.
Somebody has gone down this road already. Yes, it's going to cost, but it's just business cost. So what? You make less the first year. I told myself I'm not going to make anything. Luckily, my wife makes enough that I can live off of with nothing. And I told her too, I said, do not expect anything out of this. You'll be lucky if you don't go bankrupt, because this is a huge risk. So I brought her expectations down, and any money we make, it goes right back to the practice. We just finished doing a remodeling last week while I was away on vacation, and that cost $50,000. We added a chair. I turned my office into an extra opportunity to have a second hygienist. That's right out of George's handbook.
That's right. No, it's so important to hear, because the ones who are out there really killing it are the ones who aren't afraid to invest in their own education, and their office. And they're okay with delaying take-home pay in the interim if it means building the practice of their dreams, building that 10, 12 chairs with multi-specialties under one roof. That's where you're
That's
going,
correct.
and you're on the path to get there.
Yes. Although I tell you, it is a little freaky when you're giving your staff bonuses. I mean, last month they went way above what I thought they would go, and I had to write each one of them, I think $1,200 each one got bonus, and I was like, oof.
That's tough, huh?
That's because the rent is like $4,000. I'm giving 1 month rent away. But to my core, I said to myself, if I don't do it, then a person is as good as their word. What kind of an example? So I was like, gave it to the smile as much as I could.
Absolutely. So what would you say, like, specifically for you, the breakthroughs in that first year of working with a coach, of having someone on your team? What specifically did you kind of create out of that relationship?
What one of the things the coach told me was that when he was doing in my shoes, basically every night he was up late when his wife and kids were sleeping and working on the practice, and that's something that from day one, every night, I have two kids, a 1-year-old and a 4-year-old. Once I put them to sleep, I come back, sit at the computer, and start going through practice by numbers, look at overhead, look at answer emails, write my notes, think about what else we can do, send emails to my office manager, and try, because we are so busy during the day, I can't talk to her as much. And this was, gave me work ethic, basically, that this is serious business. You're going to have to work really hard at it so that it pays back to you. And I listened to it, and it has paid off for sure.
Yeah. No extraordinary results come from ordinary effort. You got to be willing to put, especially in that first year of ownership, is when really the front loading process of work, if it occurs, then, I'll talk for myself, that first year was a lot of work. And now it's like, I do leave the practice and I don't think much about it.
Yes.
It's you get to that point where it is on autopilot, and
Yes.
It's tough to see early on.
Exactly. And I'm sure you felt like this, especially the first few months. You feel like you can't breathe. There is decision fatigue. And it's kind of like, I don't know if you have any kids, like a parent, any decision you make, you question yourself, or at least I question. And so you never know if you're making the right decision or not. But the coach can support you, will tell you, okay. So at the beginning, I think my first month, I had $28,000 of income. And the overhead was way above, like, I think my overhead was 120% or some crazy number. And I look at that and I couldn't breathe. I felt like but he said, this is nothing to worry about. Keep going. And it feels good to feel like you have somebody to talk to at the end of the day.
Definitely. I want to harp on one thing you said, because I think it's interesting. The thought that we need to have, like, the right decision, like, is this the right choice? It's like a weird thing, because we realize there is no right choice. Like, this isn't science. This is
Correct.
like a business, and it's about relationships, and it's about
But it comes, do you know where it comes from? It comes from the fear of failure, because you're so programmed to be perfectionists, and we have to success. And every practical we took in dental school, everything, what do they look at? They look at what we did wrong. So inevitably, we become these creatures of type A personality, with only looking at glass half empty, just because we're programmed that way. And the decision-making process is going to do that to us, because we cannot fail. How could we fail? And my investment was $225,000. It's not a huge. It was less than my student loans, which I got nothing for. It was a piece of paper that said you got, this degree, nothing else. But still, that I can't imagine colleagues that buy $1 million practices or so. I can't imagine what the pressure is on them. So it's the
You're
fear
looking
of
at
fate.
one.
But you have done very well. So
No, I mean, but you're right though.
it's a
That
fear of
pressure is
failure.
real. Yeah, it totally is a fear of failure, and it kind of saddens me, how much that can hold someone back from greatness. Really, it's like it's just all in themselves. Their own getting in their own ways. It's nothing else.
Yes, and I feel that if you take calculated risks, you know, that's when things you can relax a little bit more.
For sure, and I just think it's more fun too. You're
Yes,
creating something. It's
absolutely.
the unknown of how it will go, and I think it's part of the joy of what we get to
Yes,
do.
it's not like gambling anymore.
Right. No, it's calculated
It's
risk.
calculated
Exactly.
risk.
Well, cool. And then so in hiring coach, you also sign up for practice by numbers, which I'm contractually obligated to say is a great decision. So
And that
good
came
job there.
straight from George because he said that he did a boot camp with them, and he said, it was much better than the other the other
Yeah,
ones.
the other ones,
Trying to stay politically correct here,
of course.
but I listened to what he said, and I
Yeah.
went with them. And initially, I didn't even know what I was looking at. It made no sense to me. I'm so glad that now we have a practice by now, shared practices, thing, because
Dashboard.
now I'm starting to even learn. Okay, so this
Yeah.
is what they're talking. So I am learning today. Last Friday when he was talking with his client, I learned so much. So
Yeah. So tell me how you use it in your office. I think that'd be useful to hear. Or do you use it?
I don't use it as much as I should. I'm still, you see, I feel that at least the way I approach things is that I can only fix one or two things at a time, because there is so much things to fix that I feel that one of the reasons that people get overwhelmed or kill or they go to the point of breaking is when you try to do many things at once. I try to do one or two projects at a time, projects that make the biggest difference. So practice by numbers, I brought it initially to my team, but the team was already overwhelmed with this new guy coming. They're trying to introduce me to patients and all that. And I thought to myself, I can either push this right now or I can wait. But at least I can every night look at it and I can see if something is really going bad, then I can go and say, it was mostly for my own knowledge. As if like, how a flight, when a plane is flying, you need instruments to know where your altitude and all that. So I just needed something to tell me what my speed is, what my altitude is, something. Am I crashing or am I not? That's all I wanted to know. To peace of mind for myself. Now I am intending to definitely introduce it to everybody, but probably will be towards the end of the year.
Yeah, I get that. And it's interesting what you said, because it's something that Scott Luna says a breakaway, that when you're introducing something to the staff that's going to be a change, you want to do those very slowly. And like you said, no more than one a month,
Yes.
2 a month tops. But when it comes to us, the owner, we're able to handle a little more because we're invested
Yes.
in it and we, bring it home with us. So, we can still use the software heavily for us before we, the team has the headspace to let it into
Yes.
their world and implement it. So I think that is a normal progression of these numbers tracking softwares, that, the owner masters it. And then once the staff, has a bit of time and space, they can take
Right.
some on of this. All right. We do have George with us now. George, welcome.
Thanks, Matt. Appreciate it.
So I wanted to touch on something that I thought was really cool that the guest showed in this interview, that how willing he is to invest in himself and his practice and his staff. And I think that's a really cool takeaway for for owner dentists who maybe don't have that quality and maybe wish they were a little bit more forthcoming with their investments in themselves in practice. He invested in a coach. He invested in practice by numbers. He bought his office lunch every day, his whole staff lunch every day. So George, I wanted to get your input on that as a person who is extremely willing to invest in themselves and their practice and their team. Where did that come about? What would you say to dentists who maybe don't inherently have that quality that you have?
So I think I liken it to how long-term thinking are you? So are you very this month oriented or are you very next year oriented? And so I think, for somebody to really invest in themselves to the degree that this dentist did, you really have to be thinking long-term and not caring about right now. And because you're not going to see the effect right now. That's just not how it works. But if you can really buy into that future vision that you have, and I kind of have this analogy in my mind where I feel like I'm painting a mural and it's not like this quick thing. So it takes a long time, it takes a lot of effort, and it takes a lot of resources to do it. But for me, the picture's worth it. And that's sort of the way that I've always used an analogy to kind of describe that. And it's allowed me to stick it in the uncomfortable times that make it difficult sometimes to invest in yourself when it'd be easier to do whatever makes the most sense in this moment. But when I think back to kind of that picture in my head that I'm painting, it makes it easier for me to sacrifice today for tomorrow.
Yeah, it's a cool analogy too, because that picture's not going to look very good until probably close to the very end, huh?
Yeah, and you can very quickly judge it on today. You look at it today and it looks ugly because it's not done. And it's, comparison is the thief of joy. And if you look at it and compare it to other people's paintings and other people's images, it might not look very good, but you're not done painting. So,
yeah. And to the untrained eye, like someone who's not a painter, someone who's not a dentist, this practice might look like a mess. Like he's flushing $40 a day on lunch down the toilet every day. But to someone who understands his vision, which is a 10 or 12 chair office, multi-specialty, everything under one roof, this is how he's going about getting there.
Yeah, and I really admire somebody that's willing to do that. I think it's uncommon. I think that's an uncommon trait, and it's a very astute observation that you made. I did not make that observation. And so I think it's, kudos to you for noticing that and recognizing it and praising them for it.
Yeah, it completely jumped out at me through our whole talk. And I also thought it was cool that he's a specialist, but he bought a GP office and he's not dependent on referrals. He's very much, I always think that that's the reason why I didn't become a specialist. I think because I don't like that being so at effect to just what comes in, what referrals I get, what calls I get from other offices. He's much more at cause for finding his patients, for finding his work. And I think that's cool in how he set up this office in a way that, he has control over it. It's not just like who calls him on a daily basis.
Totally. Well, I really enjoyed this interview, and I'm excited for the next part. We're going to do it again where I kind of go through this dentist dashboard live in the next episode's outro. And I think it'll be a lot of fun to kind of go through, I guess, the maze that can be practiced by numbers sometimes.
Absolutely. Okay, we'll see you next week for part 2 of this interview. That was another episode of Practice Underwater.
Thanks for listening to another episode of Practice Underwater. We'll see you guys next week.
If you're interested in one-on-one coaching with either Dr. George Hariri or Dr. Matt Garino, our contact emails are in the show notes.
And if you're interested in being on Practice Underwater as a guest, where we could look at your practice anonymously, you can go ahead and contact the email in the show notes and follow those directions to get on the show. Thanks, and we'll see you guys next week on Practice Underwater.